He lived 20 years in loneliness until he saw a beautiful woman by the tree. He had lived most of his life in silence, though it hadn't started that way. When he was a child, laughter filled the small house he grew up in. His parents, though strict at times, were loving in their own way. Neighbors would come by for tea, and the air was often full of voices, footsteps, and the occasional arguments that always seemed to end with a smile. Back then, life had movement, sound, and color. Friends came and went, as children's friends often do, but there was always someone nearby, a presence that made the world feel warm and alive. But slowly, the rhythm of life began to change for him. It was subtle at first. A friend moved to another city, then another. A cousin who had visited every summer stopped coming. Life, as he knew it, seemed to pull away from him piece by piece. At first, he tried to hold on to it. He sent letters, made calls, and even visited old acquaintances. But over time, people drifted further, busy with their lives, with careers, with families of their own. His attempts at connection felt more and more awkward. The phone rang less, letters went unanswered, and invitations became rare. He started to notice a quiet emptiness that even laughter from television couldn't fill. He began to organize his life around that emptiness. If people would not come to him, he reasoned, he would retreat. Work became his companion. Each day he would wake early, complete his tasks with precision, and return home to his small apartment. He created routines: the morning coffee, the walk to the store, the small chores that occupied time and distracted him from the echoing silence. Sometimes he wondered if he was lonely or if he had simply accepted solitude as a normal state of being. He told himself that it was easier this way, safer too. If you were alone, you could not be hurt, disappointed, or forgotten. The world's chaos could not reach you behind the walls of your own creation. Evenings were the hardest. Nights stretched long and quiet, filled with shadows that seemed heavier than the day. He would sit by the window, looking out at streets bustling with life, feeling invisible. He saw neighbors talking over fences, friends walking dogs together, couples laughing as they strolled past the streetlights. Each sight reminded him of what he had chosen to leave behind, or what had chosen to leave him. Sometimes he allowed himself a moment of grief, a wave of emotion that he quickly pushed away. Emotions, he discovered, were best managed alone. You could not risk showing them; they might break you if left unchecked. He tried filling the void with small pleasures. He would read old books and discover worlds far beyond his own lonely apartment. He cooked meals slowly, savoring flavors that reminded him of better days. He walked in nearby parks, watching children play and lovers stroll, pretending he was just another observer in the world. Yet the quiet followed him everywhere, a constant reminder that these were moments he could not share. He missed conversation, the small joy of being known, even if only a little. But admitting that longing felt dangerous, almost like weakness. So he tucked it deep inside, hiding it from himself and from the world. There were days when the silence felt like a tangible weight, pressing down on him, filling the air with heaviness. On such days, he would try talking to the walls of his apartment, as if the walls themselves could respond. He would speak aloud, sharing stories from his day, jokes he had remembered, questions he had pondered. The walls remained quiet, but sometimes, just the act of speaking broke the monotony of the long, unbroken silence. He learned to find comfort in his own voice, even if it went unheard. It became a strange, private companionship, a way to feel less alone without risking disappointment from another human being. He reflected often on why life had taken this turn. Was it fate, choice, or a mixture of both? Perhaps he had been too cautious in youth, too wary of people, too careful not to get hurt. Perhaps he had not noticed the subtle ways life offered connection until it was gone. He remembered moments of laughter, the warmth of a shared meal, the feeling of a hand on his shoulder during times of difficulty. Those memories lingered, bittersweet and distant, like light flickering through a dusty window. He would close his eyes and try to imagine them vividly, clinging to fragments of the past that seemed more like dreams than reality. Despite everything, he was not bitter. Loneliness had taught him lessons he might never have learned in company. He had discovered resilience, patience, and the quiet strength of enduring each day with dignity. He had learned to read the small details in life, the way sunlight touched the leaves outside, the sound of a bird landing on a windowsill, the subtle change in the wind as seasons shifted. He noticed things that others often missed, small beauties in a world that moved too fast for many. His senses, sharpened by solitude, made him more aware, more present in ways that society rarely allowed. In that way, his isolation had given him a unique perspective on life. Evenings, while often heavy, also became a time for reflection. He would sit quietly, recalling events of the day, observing life from the periphery, and sometimes dreaming of the people he had known. He remembered faces, voices, moments that had once been vivid but now existed only as echoes in memory. He would imagine conversations he might have had, words he might have spoken, gestures he might have made. These reflections were bittersweet, both comforting and painful, yet they reminded him that he had once lived in connection, that his heart had known warmth before it had learned to endure solitude. As the years passed, he developed a careful rhythm to his life. Solitude became familiar, predictable, and, in a way, safe. He knew each corner of his apartment, every sound of the street outside, every shadow that moved across his walls. He knew the limits of his world and found a strange comfort in those boundaries. Life had reduced itself to patterns, but within those patterns, he discovered a sense of control he had never had before. There was a strange peace in the predictability, a quiet reassurance that, at least, the world could not surprise him in hurtful ways anymore. Yet beneath this carefully constructed life of routine and isolation, a quiet longing persisted. It was not loud or urgent, but it existed, like a small ember glowing in darkness. He sometimes caught himself imagining moments he had never experienced, wondering what it would feel like to laugh with someone again, to share a simple story or a meal, to look into a pair of eyes that truly saw him. These thoughts were fleeting and often pushed aside, but they never fully disappeared. They were a subtle reminder that even in decades of loneliness, the human heart retained its capacity for connection, for warmth, and for hope. And so he continued his life, day by day, step by step, hour by hour. He walked through the quiet streets, tended to his small routines, and lived in the company of shadows and memories. Life had given him 20 years of silence, and he had learned to live with it, to endure it, and even to find beauty in its quiet spaces. Yet somewhere deep inside, a small, persistent part of him remained alert, waiting for something, or someone, to break the stillness, to remind him that life had more to offer than the walls he had built around himself. Though he did not yet know it, that moment was closer than he could imagine, a single encounter that could change everything he had learned about being alone. After living in quiet solitude for 2 decades, his days had become predictable and uneventful. Every morning and evening followed the same rhythm, every week a repeat of the last. Yet, even in the middle of routine, life has a way of surprising the most unexpecting hearts. That day, like many others, he walked along the familiar path near the open field at the edge of town. The field was wide, bordered by tall grass and scattered trees, where sunlight fell in soft patterns and the wind carried distant sounds from the village. It was a place he had walked countless times, and each time it brought him the comfort of familiarity. He had no intention of changing his routine that day. He walked slowly, his hands in his pockets, eyes occasionally scanning the ground or the horizon. Thoughts of old friends, lost opportunities, and small regrets drifted through his mind. He imagined life as a long, winding river, flowing away from him while he remained on the shore, watching the world move past. He did not feel sad. Rather, there was a quiet acceptance in his heart. Loneliness had been his companion for so long that he almost forgot it was a condition that could be interrupted. Almost. Then, as he approached the largest tree in the field, something unusual caught his attention. At first, it was just a movement in the corner of his eye, a subtle shadow against the fading sunlight. But as he looked more closely, he realized that it was a person, a woman. She was standing beneath the tree, alone, facing the horizon. She was quiet, serene, and seemed completely absorbed in her own world. The sight was so unexpected, so unlike anything that had touched his life in years, that he felt an unfamiliar flutter in his chest. His heart, long accustomed to stillness, reacted instinctively to the sight of another human being in such a quiet, open place. He stopped walking, unsure whether to continue or turn away. Something about her presence felt different. There was a calmness, a beauty in the way she stood, the way her hair moved gently in the breeze, the way sunlight seemed to touch her face just so. She wasn't laughing or speaking, yet the moment felt full of unspoken life. For decades he had avoided connection, had convinced himself that relationships brought disappointment. But this felt like a gentle reminder that life still had surprises. A small spark of curiosity, of longing flickered inside him. He realized, almost with fear, that he wanted to see her again, to know more, even if he could not yet explain why. He considered walking away. That had been the safer choice for 20 years. He had survived, even thrived in his own way, by keeping distance from the unpredictable nature of people. But something held him rooted to the ground. His eyes lingered on her, memorizing the way she leaned slightly against the tree, the soft curve of her shoulders, the quiet dignity of someone unbothered by the world. She seemed entirely present in the moment, yet untouched by it, a paradox that both puzzled and fascinated him. He had not known that watching someone in silence could feel like an awakening, but now he understood that it could. He tried to imagine speaking, to imagine introducing himself, but words felt heavy and uncertain. 20 years of silence had eroded the ease of conversation, and he worried about saying something wrong, about ruining the moment before it could even begin. So he continued to watch, a quiet observer from a distance, letting the moment stretch and linger. Time, which had once seemed linear and repetitive, now felt suspended. The ordinary field, the familiar tree, the soft rustle of grass in the breeze, everything became extraordinary simply because she was there. Her presence transformed the mundane into something rich and alive. He noticed the details, the way the sunlight caught her hair, the way she occasionally tilted her head as if listening to something beyond the senses of the ordinary world. He wondered what she was thinking, what story had brought her to this quiet place, what joys and sorrows she carried with her. He imagined 1,000 possibilities, each one painting her in different lights, and each one stirring a feeling he had long forgotten. Curiosity about another human soul, a longing to connect, to understand, to be seen and to see. It was a gentle reminder that life, even after years of stillness, could offer moments of magic, moments that could change the course of everything. The wind picked up slightly, and a few leaves fell from the tree, swirling around her feet. The movement made her glance down, and in that brief instant, she looked directly at him. Their eyes met for just a moment, and he felt a strange recognition, as if two worlds that had been separate for a long time were suddenly brushing against each other. There was no fear, no judgment, only a quiet acknowledgement of existence. That single glance was enough to make him aware of how long it had been since someone had truly seen him, not superficially, but with a quiet understanding that went beyond words. He looked away quickly, embarrassed by the intensity of the feeling, yet unwilling to leave the moment behind. He spent hours in the days that followed returning to the field, hoping to see her again. Each visit was filled with anticipation, yet he did not rush to approach her. He understood, perhaps instinctively, that true connection could not be forced, that some things needed time to grow. So he walked, silently observing, gradually learning her routines, her gestures, the way she interacted with the world around her. He noticed her kindness toward stray animals, her attentiveness to small details in nature, and the quiet joy she seemed to take in simple things. With each observation, he felt a growing admiration, a connection that went deeper than words, that touched the heart of his long-buried emotions. He also began noticing changes within himself. The flutter in his chest, the subtle excitement before each visit, the sense of anticipation when approaching the tree, these were feelings that had lain dormant for decades. Loneliness, which had once defined him, began to feel less permanent, less insurmountable. He realized that perhaps solitude had not been his destiny, but a state that prepared him for this very moment. 20 years of living quietly, observing the world from a distance, had allowed him to recognize beauty, kindness, and authenticity when it appeared. He had grown patient, sensitive, and aware, qualities that suddenly made him feel capable of connection once more. There were moments when he questioned himself. Should he speak? Should he leave a note? Should he try to introduce himself directly? Anxiety, long a silent companion, whispered warnings, reminding him of past disappointments, of the risks of reaching out. Yet, at the same time, a gentle courage began to rise within him. He had survived loneliness, and now he realized that life's rewards often required small risks. To move beyond observation into interaction was not reckless. It was the natural next step in a life suddenly filled with possibility. The thought gave him hope, a quiet warmth that he had not felt in decades. Then, one afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the field, he finally found the courage to approach her. He moved slowly, deliberately, careful not to startle her, aware that every step was a step out of the life he had known and into something uncertain but full of promise. She looked at him, her expression neutral but not unkind, and for a moment, words seemed unnecessary. There was an understanding between them, a silent acknowledgement of two solitary lives intersecting by chance. And though they had not yet spoken, he felt the first real stirrings of a connection that could grow into something meaningful, something that might slowly, gently, fill the empty spaces in his heart. That evening, as he walked back home, the field and the tree behind him, he carried with him a feeling he had thought lost forever: hope. He realized that even after 20 years of loneliness, life could offer surprises that rekindled the human spirit. The sight of her, the simple presence of another soul, had awakened something deep within him, a sense that life was still unfolding, that he was still capable of experiencing joy, connection, and even love. He understood that this was only the beginning, that the story of this encounter was yet to be written. But for the first time in decades, he felt alive, alert to the possibilities that awaited him. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future that included her presence, a future where the walls he had built around himself might slowly come down. He did not know what would happen next, but he felt ready to find out. Loneliness had taught him patience, resilience, and self-reliance, but it had also made him ready for something more. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, he realized that life had once again opened a door, offering a quiet, beautiful promise. That even after decades of solitude, moments of connection could arrive, unexpected and transformative. After that first encounter beneath the tree, his life began to change in ways he had never expected. The days that had once passed in quiet monotony now carried a new sense of anticipation. Every morning, as he prepared to leave his apartment for the familiar walk, his thoughts turned to her. He wondered if she would be there, whether she would look the same, and what small details he might notice this time. The simple act of imagining her brought a subtle warmth to his chest, a flutter he had not felt in years. Loneliness, which had been his constant companion for 2 decades, suddenly seemed less permanent, less defining. There was now a possibility, a gentle, fragile possibility, that connection could exist again. He continued his walks, approaching the tree with the same careful, deliberate steps he had taken before. She was usually there, absorbed in her own world, as serene and calm as the first time he saw her. At first, he said nothing, content to watch from a distance. Words still felt heavy, still carried the weight of his long isolation. But he began to notice patterns in her actions. The way she would pause to observe a bird, the way she would smile slightly at the sway of the grass, the gentle tilt of her head as she looked at the horizon. He found himself learning her habits, as if simply by watching, he could understand something about her without ever speaking. And with each passing day, that understanding grew, forming a quiet bridge between their lives. Eventually, he began to speak. At first, it was just small words, casual remarks about the weather or the way the sun hit the field. She responded politely, with a gentle smile, and though their conversations were brief, he felt the thrill of connection once more. It was slow, careful, and deliberate, but it was enough to ignite hope in his heart. He discovered that speaking to her did not feel frightening, at least not as much as he had feared. The words came hesitantly at first, then more confidently, as if the years of silence had been a preparation rather than a barrier. Each conversation, no matter how simple, became a treasure, a tiny thread weaving him back into the fabric of human interaction. He began to notice how her presence affected him in subtle ways. His posture changed, he walked taller, carried himself with more ease. He found himself smiling at little things he had once ignored, noticing the small beauties of the world. The way sunlight fell on leaves, the sound of a bird singing in the distance, the soft sway of the grass in the wind. These were the things he had always observed, but now they felt richer, more meaningful because she seemed to notice them too. Her attention to detail, her quiet joy in the small wonders of life, inspired him to rediscover the world around him, not as a solitary observer, but as someone who could share moments, even silently, with another human being. As the days turned into weeks, their interactions deepened. They began to exchange small stories, memories of childhood favorite places, little moments that made them laugh or think. He discovered that she had her own quiet world, shaped by experiences both joyful and challenging, just as he had his own. And as he shared parts of his life with her, he realized that he was no longer afraid of being seen. Her calm, attentive presence made it safe to reveal pieces of himself he had long hidden, to speak of feelings he had buried for years. In her, he found a listener, a companion, and gradually, a friend. He also began to notice changes in her. She seemed to look forward to his presence as much as he did to hers. Sometimes, she would speak before he could, sharing an observation or a thought, her eyes lighting up with a quiet excitement. He realized that their connection was no longer one-sided, that his presence brought her comfort and joy just as hers brought him. This understanding deepened his courage, encouraging him to speak more freely, to laugh more openly, to share not just words but emotions. Slowly, he was learning the art of connection again, patiently, gently, without rushing or forcing. Evenings became a time of reflection for him, moments to replay their interactions and savor them quietly. He thought about her smile, the way she tilted her head, the soft tone of her voice. He remembered small gestures, how she had reached out to steady a bird's nest that had fallen, how she had laughed softly at a squirrel chasing a leaf, how she had paused to watch the clouds drift across the sky. These were small things, ordinary moments in themselves, but to him they became extraordinary, imbued with significance because of the attention, care, and presence she brought to them. They reminded him that connection is not always loud or dramatic, but often gentle, quiet, and persistent. There were also moments of self-doubt, as there always are when one begins to emerge from a long period of isolation. He wondered if he was imagining her interest, if his excitement was merely a projection of his own loneliness. He feared that he might overstep, say something wrong, or scare her away. But these fears, while present, did not dominate his thoughts. He found that courage grows in the small steps, in the careful attention to the other's comfort, in the recognition that connection is a mutual dance rather than a single act. Each day, each interaction helped him gain confidence, helping him see that he could step out of his solitude without losing himself. Gradually, laughter began to return. Not loud, dramatic laughter, but the soft, spontaneous kind that comes from small joys. They would laugh at shared observations, at little stories, at the quirks of nature around them. Sometimes, laughter came in the silence, when words were unnecessary and both simply watched the world together, sharing in quiet amusement. He realized that laughter was a bridge, a way to communicate without the fear of judgment, a way to feel closeness without words. And as laughter returned, so did a sense of ease he had not felt in decades, a lightness in his chest, a quiet joy that made the weight of solitude feel less oppressive. Over time, he began to notice the subtle ways in which their companionship influenced his behavior beyond the field. He started talking to neighbors again, offering small greetings, exchanging smiles with people he had once ignored. He found himself paying more attention to friends and family he had lost contact with, sending letters and making calls he had postponed for years. The presence of another human being, even in the gentle form of her company, reminded him that the world was not as lonely as he had believed. He realized that the capacity for connection had never left him. It had only been dormant, waiting for the right spark to awaken it. One day, as they sat beneath the tree, she mentioned a small personal story, an event from her past that had shaped her in ways he could relate to. Listening to her, he felt an unexpected surge of empathy, a deep recognition of shared human experience. He realized that connection is built not just on words or shared moments, but on understanding, on witnessing each other's lives with honesty and care. For the first time in decades, he felt a sense of equality in companionship, not needing to protect himself from disappointment, not fearing rejection, but simply being present, open, and attentive. And as she spoke, he understood that he was no longer the same man who had walked these paths alone for 20 years. He had begun to change, gently, quietly, without even noticing. With every passing day, their friendship grew stronger, forming a bond built on patience, respect, and mutual understanding. They did not rush into intimacy or declarations. There was no hurry, no pressure. Each small conversation, each shared silence was a building block, creating a foundation that felt steady and enduring. He learned to enjoy the journey itself, the simple act of being near her, the comfort of her presence, the security of knowing she would be there. In her company, he discovered that life could be slow, deliberate, and beautiful without being overwhelming. Connection, he realized, was as much about quality as it was about quantity, as much about presence as it was about words. And yet, he never lost the awareness of the fragility of such moments. Loneliness had taught him the impermanence of relationships, the unpredictability of life, and the value of each fleeting encounter. He approached this new connection with care, mindful not to take it for granted, aware that it could be altered by a single misstep. This mindfulness did not hinder him. Rather, it enhanced the experience, making each interaction richer, more precious, and more meaningful. For the first time, he understood that true connection requires attention, empathy, and patience, qualities he had cultivated over years of solitude without realizing it. By the end of those first months, he had become a man transformed, though quietly, subtly. The presence of another human being had awakened his capacity for hope, his ability to engage with the world, and his willingness to trust again. He understood that the years of loneliness had not been wasted. They had prepared him for this moment, shaped him into someone who could appreciate, respect, and nurture connection. And as he walked home from the field each evening, he felt a sense of anticipation that was no longer tinged with fear but filled with curiosity, excitement, and gentle joy. Life, he realized, was capable of surprise, even after decades of waiting. The months of gentle companionship beneath the tree had brought changes he could hardly have imagined. Life, which had once been measured in the quiet rhythm of solitude, now moved with new energy, subtle yet powerful. Each meeting with her had built a connection rooted in patience, understanding, and small joys. He began to notice that he looked forward to their time together more than anything else in his day. The walks to the field no longer felt like a routine. They were journeys filled with hope, anticipation, and curiosity about what might unfold. He had learned to live with silence, but now he learned the beauty of shared moments. Even small gestures like a smile or a glance carried immense meaning. He had always been cautious in life, shaped by decades of isolation, but in her presence, caution was tempered by a growing courage. The conversations that had begun with simple remarks about the weather had evolved into stories, shared memories, and even quiet confessions. He told her about the small joys he had discovered in his solitude, the smell of rain on the earth, the patterns of sunlight on the floor, the sound of birdsong in the early morning. She listened with attention, her eyes reflecting understanding and curiosity, as if every word mattered. And in return, she shared parts of her life, childhood memories, moments of laughter, struggles she had faced. Through these exchanges, a profound trust began to develop, one that neither rushed nor forced itself but grew naturally, quietly, like roots beneath the soil. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the tree branches, he realized just how much she had changed him. He noticed that he smiled more freely, laughed without hesitation, and felt a lightness in his chest he hadn't known for years. The loneliness that had once defined him seemed distant, almost unimaginable. In her presence, he felt seen, not just noticed but truly seen. It was as if the walls he had built around himself, the careful barriers that protected him from disappointment, were slowly dissolving. Each conversation, each shared silence, each smile chipped away at the weight of decades of isolation, replacing it with warmth, connection, and hope. The field beneath the tree had become a sanctuary. It was a place where they could exist together without pretense, where words were optional and presence was enough. Sometimes, they would sit side by side in silence, watching the grass sway and the clouds drift across the sky. Other times, they would talk for hours, exchanging stories, jokes, and observations about the world around them. These interactions were neither dramatic nor extraordinary, but in their simplicity lay their power. He realized that connection was not always about grand gestures or loud declarations. Sometimes, it was about the quiet consistency of being present, the willingness to listen, and the ability to share moments without expectation. Over time, he began to see life differently. The world outside the field, which had once seemed distant and overwhelming, now appeared full of possibilities. He started interacting more with neighbors, greeting people he had long ignored, and offering help when he saw a need. Small acts of kindness, once unnoticed, became natural expressions of his renewed engagement with the world. Even mundane tasks, walking down the street, buying groceries, tending to his apartment, were transformed by the awareness that connection could exist in many forms. He felt part of life again, no longer merely an observer but an active participant in the shared experiences of others. Their relationship deepened gradually, built on trust and respect rather than haste or expectation. There was no rush, no pressure to define what their connection might become. Instead, they allowed it to grow organically, savoring each moment and learning about each other in quiet, thoughtful ways. He discovered her sense of humor, the kindness in her actions, the intelligence in her observations. She, in turn, noticed the depth of his empathy, the gentleness in his words, the care he took in understanding the world around them. Through this slow process, a profound emotional intimacy developed, one that was richer and more enduring than any fleeting excitement could have been. One day, as autumn approached and the leaves turned shades of gold and red, he realized that he had begun to dream about a future that included her. The thought, once unimaginable, now filled him with a quiet joy. He imagined sharing simple routines, morning walks, afternoon conversations, evenings spent in quiet companionship. He imagined moments of laughter, shared stories, and mutual support. And most importantly, he imagined being able to face the world together, not as solitary individuals, but as two people who had discovered in each other a sense of belonging that neither had known in decades. The idea was not overwhelming, it was comforting, gentle, and deeply desirable. He also began reflecting on the years of loneliness that had brought him to this point. Those 2 decades of quiet solitude had been difficult, sometimes unbearably so, but they had shaped him in ways he now appreciated. Loneliness had taught him patience, introspection, and resilience. It had honed his ability to notice the small beauties of life, to appreciate subtle gestures, and to value connection when it finally arrived. He realized that his isolation had not been wasted. It had prepared him for the depth and richness of the companionship he now experienced. What once seemed like a curse had, in hindsight, become a quiet teacher, guiding him toward understanding, empathy, and a readiness for love. Their relationship continued to flourish in small, meaningful ways. They shared meals beneath the tree, laughing over simple mistakes in cooking or teasing each other gently about habits and preferences. They explored nearby places together, discovering hidden corners of the town, small parks, and quiet streets that felt familiar yet new. He introduced her to some of his old favorite spots, and she, in turn, showed him her own cherished places. Through these shared experiences, they discovered that companionship was not about grand adventures, but about the subtle joy of experiencing life together. The ordinary became extraordinary simply because it was shared. Evenings spent together often became moments of reflection and connection. They would sit beneath the tree as the sun set, sharing thoughts about their day, their dreams, and even their fears. He found himself speaking about hopes he had long kept buried, and she listened without judgment, offering gentle encouragement and understanding. In return, she revealed her vulnerabilities, creating a bond of mutual trust and emotional intimacy. Through these quiet exchanges, he learned that love and companionship were not about perfection or constant excitement, but about honesty, patience, and the courage to be oneself. For the first time in decades, he felt completely comfortable with who he was. There were moments when he paused to appreciate how far he had come. The man who had once walked through life in silence, watching the world from a distance, had transformed into someone capable of connection, joy, and vulnerability. He had learned to trust again, to hope again, and to find happiness in the simplest of moments. And yet, he knew that this transformation had not been instantaneous. It had been a gradual process, nurtured by small interactions, patience, and the gentle presence of another human being. The journey from isolation to companionship had been long and sometimes difficult, but it had been worth every step. As winter approached, their bond grew stronger. The cold air and shorter days did not diminish their meetings. Instead, they brought new opportunities for shared experiences. They would bundle up in warm clothes, walking together beneath the bare trees, their breath visible in the crisp air. They laughed at the sound of crunching leaves beneath their feet and shared stories to keep the chill at bay. These simple acts of togetherness reinforced the emotional connection they had cultivated over months, creating memories that were rich in warmth, joy, and intimacy. Life had taken them from solitude to shared experience, teaching them both the value of human connection. Eventually, he realized that his life had changed entirely. The man who had spent 20 years in solitude, resigned to the quiet rhythm of loneliness, now felt alive, connected, and full of hope. He understood that life's beauty often arrived in unexpected ways, sometimes quietly, sometimes subtly, but always meaningfully. The encounter beneath the tree, which had seemed accidental at first, had grown into a profound connection that reshaped his entire world. He had learned that even after decades of waiting, life could still offer moments of joy, companionship, and love. It was a lesson he would carry with him forever. Looking back, he understood that the journey had been as important as the destination. The long years of solitude had taught him empathy, patience, and self-awareness. They had prepared him to appreciate connection when it finally appeared. And the presence of the woman beneath the tree had reminded him that life's surprises often come quietly, gently, and unexpectedly. Together, they had discovered that happiness does not require perfection or grand gestures, but rather patience, understanding, and the willingness to share life's simplest moments. In the end, he realized that life, even after 20 years of loneliness, could still be full of beauty, warmth, and meaningful connection.